Welcome everyone to IFMA Toronto and South Central Ontario's first web series. My name is Sarah Clare. I'm the Vice President of Programming and Education, and by day I proudly work for Infrastructure Ontario. I am your virtual moderator today. Registration for this event sold out in one day, and we welcome all of our members and non-members. I would like to call you future members, maybe. Today's presentation is being recorded as promised, and we will post it to the IFMA website afterwards. Thank you to the IFMA team for making this presentation possible, especially to Lisa Martel, our chapter administrator, and Kay Pays, our Vice President of Communications and Membership. The topic of COVID and the impact on the return to work has certainly been a hot one. As tenants, landlords, and of course facility managers are contemplating what this is going to look like, we are thrilled to partner with the Toronto Financial District BIA for today's presentation. The Financial District and its connection to the path, subway systems, retail concourses, and food courts certainly bring its unique complexities. We are going to dive into that today. Today's presentation is approximately 20 minutes long, leaving lots of room for active discussion afterwards. We'll open up the Q&A to you all where you can type into the chat function, which you'll see on your toolbar. Before I conduct our speaker introductions, I'd like to just pause for a safety moment. Every one of us plays a part in stopping the spread of COVID. We strongly recommend that you're referring to public health authority guidelines and regularly hoping to decrease the risk. As we learn more about the virus and research develops, so do these guidelines. Ensure you are practicing good hygiene and washing your hands regularly, physically distancing and self-isolating when needed. Many of us in facility management are on the front lines. It is critical to ensure you have received training in how to use PPE and cleaning and disinfecting products. Now with that, I'm going to introduce our lovely speakers. Amy Harrell is the Operations Manager for the Toronto Financial District BIA. With nearly 20 years of experience in downtown management, Amy is a passionate advocate of public space, placemaking, and neighborhood improvement. She strives to improve the experience of stakeholders through award-winning strategies, programs, and partnerships. Prior to moving to Toronto, Amy was the Director of District Services at Jacksonville's Business Improvement District, Downtown Vision, Inc. She holds a BA in English. Brody Johnson is the Planning and Advocacy Manager for the Toronto Financial District BIA. He works with property managers in the City of Toronto on a daily basis to improve the public realm in the financial district. Brody has a passion for commercial real estate and has led the development and implementation of the new pathway finding and signage system across more than 75 buildings. Brody holds a Master of Planning degree from Ryerson University. Patrick Burke is the Communications Manager for the Toronto Financial District BIA. He has 8 years of experience helping organizations communicate effectively. Patrick is a committee city builder who delivers communications and policy solutions that make urban areas work better. Before joining the Financial District BIA, he worked as an advisor to the Ontario Minister of Municipal Affairs, Bill Morrow, and as a consultant at the communications agency, Mercado. Patrick holds a BA and a postgraduate certificate in public relations. Thank you all for being here today. And with that, I will pass over the presentation to Amy.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you to IFMA for inviting us to present to your group. I apologize for leaving my camera off today. I've got some construction going on my townhouse, and I'm currently working in my mudroom, so you can actually hear me over the banging. The Toronto Financial District Business Improvement Area represents property owners and businesses in the second largest financial center in North America. We focus on leading with policy, implementing solutions to improve the public realm, and ensuring workers are kept informed about day-to-day activities. Our unique attributes of the financial district, including the path, Union Station, and several subway station connections, create challenges in moving volumes of people through a relatively compact area. In mid-April, we were approached by several of our large landlords for assistance in compiling recommendations for a uniform approach for return to work plans for buildings. We are not facility managers. However, we do have the ability to connect, collaborate, and respond very quickly. To develop these recommendations, we interviewed return to work teams from 5 financial district landlords, including Bentall Green Oak, Brookfield Properties, Cadillac Fairview, Oxford Properties, and Quadro Property Group. We also conducted research on public health regulations and guidelines and best practices being implemented in other countries. The initial recommendations were revised based on landlord feedback, and version 2 of this report was published on May 1st. These recommendations are intended to provide a framework
Amy, I think we lost your audio.
and the implementation of these recommendations is necessarily site. Can you hear me?
We got you back, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So Patrick will now speak to public health regulations.
Thanks, Amy. So we really wanted to make it easy for our members to stay on top of changing government regulations. So this document is available on our website, and in it we've linked to web pages from the provincial, the federal and municipal City of Toronto websites that outline the specific regulations they've made related to COVID-19. And we'd just like to remind everyone to check in, as Sarah said off the top, regularly, because they are changing and they really do come before the recommendations that we're presenting here today. That being said, what we're talking about today really is very much aligned with what we've seen from government to this point, particularly Ontario's industry-specific guidelines. There really are a lot of regulations to keep track of, but generally speaking, they flow from a couple of core principles that we're probably all familiar with right now. So general hygiene and etiquette, including washing your hands, staying home if you're ill, cleaning those high touch point areas in your facilities, providing for that physical distancing of 2 meters between people, and then adding protection like sneeze guards and face coverings, especially when that distancing isn't possible. So Ontario so far has been leading in terms of providing regulations that impact office spaces and facilities. And almost a month ago today, they released a 3-stage plan for reopening. In a nutshell, what it means is that some businesses will open before others. But there have been some incremental changes throughout. So for example, garden centers opened before stage 1 officially began. So important to keep checking in because there may be a change that impacts your facility that doesn't happen in a formal stage change from stage 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. There are two other key pieces that I think we should keep in mind that were outlined in this report. One is that the province expects remote work to continue throughout the reopening process, and they also expect to continue to restrict large public gatherings, so things like concerts and sporting events, for the foreseeable future. Now, we've had a provincial approach so far that may or may not change in the future. We have seen in some provinces, for example, Alberta and Quebec, specific recommendations made for particular cities. So in those instances, Calgary, Brooks, and the City of Montreal were excluded or delayed from reopening because the COVID situation in those particular contexts was more pressing. You may have also seen news recently that public health officials in Southern Ontario are providing their own criteria for clear benchmarks they think should be hit before we move from one stage to the other. Now, it's not clear what, how binding this will be and what that effect that will have on regulations, but important to keep in mind that there may be a regional approach going forward. And then from an international context, looking at South Korea, they've been very, very effective at tamping down on that first outbreak. They've relaxed restrictions, and now they're dealing with the second outbreak, and they're reimposing some of those restrictions. So in Ontario, we hope for slow and steady progress, but important to be prepared just in case we have to re-implement some of those restrictions. And talking about the international context, I'll let Brody tell you a little bit more about what we've learned from industry in a global environment.
Great, thanks. So while preparing our document, naturally, the pandemic situation was quite fluid. We were seeing new or changing information coming out on what seemed like a daily basis. Countries were at different points in their progression of the virus, and certainly their measures and actions reflected this fact. You know, we saw everything from full-scale lockdowns to far less restrictive efforts in many cases. Some jurisdictions as well were enacting very little, if any, actions at all. Additionally, some countries like China, for example, were already considering recovery efforts, and we were able to learn from their experience. And building on Amy's earlier point, we really do have a great ability to connect and respond quickly and serve as an aggregator of information. And to capture the appropriate information, we conducted extensive research, which did include interviews with return to work teams of downtown Toronto's commercial real estate leaders. In addition, we also attended many webinars by local and global commercial real estate associations and management firms. We found particularly useful were the recovery presentations, the office recovery presentations by Cushman & Wakefield and BOMA with its many international affiliates. On that point, BOMA China, for example, did present a very useful and informative case study outlining measures being taken by a major office building in Guangzhou to manage the return to work of their tenants. We were able to extract several useful lessons and apply them within the Canadian cultural and political context to really suit our specific needs. And then finally, in furnishing our updated document in second version, many international jurisdictions across Europe, the United States, and several Canadian provinces as well were beginning to outline their plans for recovery. Most, from what we saw, were scheduling a phased approach and a set of timelines to begin lifting restrictions on different sectors and allowing those people to then return to work. And in our update, we included a summary of several highlighted timelines from across those various jurisdictions. So now I'll turn it back over to Amy, and she'll begin by outlining key assumptions and general recommendations for common areas.
Thanks, Bertie. My apologies for the connectivity issues I'm having with my internet right now. So the overarching goal of our recommendations was to provide a high level of comfort for returning workers. Several key assumptions related to public behavior and expectations were used to inform these recommendations. The assumptions are primarily focused on physical distancing and personal hygiene. However, consideration was also given to PPE, health screenings, occupant load, and building flexibility. As we drafted these recommendations, it became clear that there are 4 critical areas to ensure a uniform approach for return to work operations. Creating new social protocols for the movement of people, establishing a consistent approach to health screenings, ensuring consistent use of PPE, and implementing clear communication of new social protocols. The report is available on our website, torontofinancialdistrict.com, and contains dozens of recommendations in several areas. Rather than a line-by-line reading of the report, we'll focus on key areas of concern. There are several recommendations that are relevant on a broad, general basis. Public-facing landlords should wear masks. Landlords agreed that they would be strongly recommending that anyone entering the property wear a mask. However, they did not intend to provide masks or enforce this as a requirement. Landlords should provide adequate disposal containers for PPE. Most landlords were considering implementation of some level of health screening for their workers and direct contractors, but would not be extending health screenings as a requirement to enter the property. Increased cleaning should continue with a focus on frequent touch points and targeted deployment for visibility. Signage with key messages should be consistent and placed in strategic areas to reinforce these new social protocols. And finally, we were hearing that landlords are also reviewing future opportunities for investment in touchless technology. Aside from the above items, the top concern was related to grade changes. Considerable discussion and thought were given to these recommendations, which were based on the consensus of landlords and international best practices. The recommendations include limiting passengers to 3 to 4 people per elevator cab, maintaining 3 steps between people on escalators and stairs, keeping right and no passing on stairs and escalators, providing queuing locations for elevators and other grade changes as needed, evaluating implications of allowing emergency stairwells to be used by lower level tenants. This includes fire code implications, cleaning, life safety, and security. And finally, ensuring adequate signage is posted to communicate new protocols in these areas. Properties are encouraged to consider creative ideas such as decals in elevators and markings on escalators. Deployment of staff to assist in these areas during peak periods for the first few days as new groups of workers will return will help to quickly instill new behavior. The report includes recommendations for a number of other common areas, including building entrances, washrooms, lobbies, and concierge and security stations. A few of these recommendations are highlighted here, and more detailed recommendations for specific areas may be found in our report. Delineation of public space, such as in and outdoors, will be key to allowing people to move through common areas comfortably. Clear communication related to cleaning protocols, physical distancing, and personal hygiene to provide the focus for these recommendations, and should be deployed strategically throughout all properties. I'll turn it over now to Brody to talk about the path, food courts, and retail tenants.
So for those who haven't experienced it, the path is quite the vast pedestrian network. It's largely underground, and it's certainly unique to the downtown core. Across the entirety, the path connects about 75 privately owned buildings. Now, with that said, the principles behind the recommendations for adjusted path operations may be applicable in other highly trafficked facilities as well. So early on in the pandemic, effectively managing the space in the path was an important consideration, and the Financial District Security Group worked with the TTC and other path landlords to reduce the hours in the path to 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends, with the full closure on the weekends. These hours are still in effect and will be reviewed for any changes as buildings begin to repopulate and transit ridership continues to increase. The path also has a number of entry points and connections between the properties themselves. We recommend the connecting doors remain in the open position where possible to minimize contact with frequent touch points. Additionally, the establishment of specified in and outdoors and designated one-way traffic flows will help maintain physical distancing. Finally, regarding pinch points, both in the path and in other common areas, they are a key concern. Recommendations we've outlined in this area are similar to other common areas and are focused on principles such as keeping people moving to the right, not passing, and the deployment of stanchions and signage to direct traffic flow and maintain adequate physical distancing. Regarding food courts, as expected, there are a number of food courts in office buildings in the financial district, and we've given special consideration to ensuring food court tenants are able to operate safely in the age of physical distancing. Our recommendations focus on some key points, such as landlord and tenant communication is and will continue to be critical in ensuring tenants are able to operate effectively. We do recommend that landlords should work with tenants to ensure they meet requirements for queuing or other building operations, and that they are informed about building occupancy levels and tenant schedules regarding their return to work plans. We also expect that as people return to work, there will be demand for takeaway options for breaks and lunches. This will likely require expansion of queuing lines with adequate signage to assist customers in meeting these physical distancing requirements. And on seating, we do understand that most landlords are removing seating or delineating physical distancing requirements within seating areas through signage. Landlords are encouraged as well, where possible, to remove seating close to food court tenants to allow for increased queuing space as well. And finally, for retail tenants in this section, as I think most of you are aware, many retailers such as grocery stores, pharmacies, and liquor stores have already implemented physical distancing and queuing measures, both inside and outside of their locations. And while we expect those types of measures to continue, limitations such as occupancy levels on retail and restaurants, those will be driven by public health regulations and guidelines moving forward. Regarding in-unit considerations, while tenants will be responsible for managing physical distancing requirements and other regulations within their premises, we do strongly recommend that landlords be prepared to work with tenants to facilitate and support installation of measures such as signage, protective barriers, and queuing areas to provide an enhanced and safer experience. I'll now ask Amy to talk about recommendations for office tenants and property operations.
Return to work operations will necessarily be driven by plans implemented by your office tenants. Landlords should provide guidance to tenants to allow for a manageable ramp up of building operations while remaining flexible to meet the demands of tenants and balancing public health concerns. Communication will be paramount to ensure landlords and tenants are on the same page with respect to adjusted schedules, building operations, new protocols, etc. In addition to information about scheduling, landlords should discuss visitor access, tenant work orders, tenant-conducted health screenings, and other relevant procedures and responsibilities. With the limitation of distancing in place, operation of large commercial towers will be challenging without tenant cooperation. Landlords should encourage tenants to employ a phased-in approach to return to work, with consideration given to adjusted schedules to reduce rush hour impact on building operations. For example, staggering start times over a 3 to 4 hour period and introducing evening and weekend work schedules will help ensure physical distancing and ease strain on common areas and elevators. A guide of practical return to work tips for employers has also been included in the appendix of this report to provide support for smaller employers. Patrick will be speaking to this shortly. Our discussions with landlords during the information gathering phase highlighted several key areas of property operations for consideration. The report's recommendations are necessarily broad to account for the varying operations of individual properties and do not include technical specifications. We recommend landlords use industry best practices as applicable. Recommendations in this area include landlord workers, security and cleaning staff protocols, supplies and equipment, goods movement, fire drills, contractor access, and more. I'll now ask Patrick to provide an overview of communication recommendations and our practical tips for employers.
So communications with your tenants, workers, and the general public are going to be really key to a successful return to work. And we encourage you to consider all those communication tools that you have at your disposal and which messages you want to pair with them. So for example, in those high traffic spaces where you have common areas, a lot of people flowing through quickly, that's a great place to use physical signage or elevator screens to communicate those core public health messages like keeping your distance and washing your hands, wearing a face covering if that's something you're encouraging. The graphic I've used here is actually from our sister BIA and the waterfront, a really different physical context, but the takeaway here is that people are going to be encountering these messages in a lot of different contexts. So if we can stay consistent, refer to those public health messages, that message is going to be more impactful and resonate with them more effectively. For tenant communications, you probably want to be checking in pretty frequently. Picking up the phone and talking to someone, doing a video call is always a great way to check in and add a personal touch. Some of the landlords in our area are also deploying surveys, so they're getting a sense of what employee plans for returning are and what their concerns are when they would come back. They've also prepared return to work packages so that employees and tenants know exactly how the building will operate when they eventually start returning to work. Tenant apps and intranets are great for developing a sort of virtual common area. So things like tenant appreciation events are not going to be the same for the foreseeable future, but some landlords have done a great job at using an app or an intranet site to provide health advice, yoga sessions, meditation sessions to really create that sense of community. And social media is a great tool for promotion. So either directing people to your own resources, or in the case of the Path, where you have a lot of retail that hasn't quite opened yet, supporting them when the time comes, letting people know that they're open, that they're providing takeout options, and letting them know what's happening to keep people safe. So photos of those social distancing or physical distancing decals will really go a long way. Now, we were asked at the request of our members to put together an employee return to work guide. What we heard from the major landlords was that there was really a variance in tenants in terms of how much they had planned for a return to work. Some of them were large, sophisticated organizations that had international experience, and they really had a clear, detailed plan for the return to work. Other organizations were focused so much on the day-to-day that they hadn't yet found the resources to make those plans. So these are really a list of practical tips to prompt those plans, help people make them. And one key piece in this is really going to be employee comfort. I mean, that was a key piece in us putting together this guide, and it's going to be a key piece for tenants to communicate to their employees. And you really want to reassure them. They're going to feel anxious entering this space, so let them know that you care and that you have a plan to keep them safe. And make sure that they have sufficient time with the plan, sufficient time to understand what those new practices are. And also let them listen and let them ask questions and raise concerns and try to address them as they come up, which will require being adaptable. So your employees are going to have different risk levels. They'll probably have different caretaking responsibilities at home, and they'll have different ways of getting to work. So if you can listen to their concerns and adapt where possible to suit those individual needs, that's going to be a big advantage in terms of making them feel comfortable when they return. Now, the other sort of bucket I've created here to summarize this document, which is linked to in our broader return to work guide, is really building on the common principles that we've talked about today. So physical distancing, the graphic here is actually from the Cushman and Wakefield guide that Brody referenced earlier on creating that 6-foot office. So you can see a 6-foot space in that white area and then a black area where people can walk up and talk to their coworkers from a safe distance. We also saw people making adjustments to offices as they currently were. So spacing desks out, or maybe using every other desk in a kind of a checkerboard pattern to give people that physical distancing space. And as Amy mentioned, phasing the return to work. So you're coming back with just a smaller percentage of your workforce, and they might not all be arriving at 9 o'clock. Their arrival and departure will probably be phased out over the day. Cleaning is going to be a key issue, and eliminating touch points when it's possible. So if you have a fire door, that fire door is going to stay there. But there may be some doors where you can prop open, you may be able to remove the door or implement a touchless technology that will help remove a common touch point. And then there are a bunch of regular office materials that we had been used to all touching, like a printer or a stapler or whiteboard materials. And you may want to remove those or limit access and implement strict cleaning procedures. And then finally, preparation is going to be a key point. We've all heard about supply chain shortages and issues. So if you're providing PPE or cleaning materials, make sure you have a sufficient supply to deal with any of those issues. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. We'd really like to thank you for joining, and we appreciate your interest. We know that you have a really important role to play in the safe return to work. And I'll turn it over to Sarah, who will facilitate the questions.
Thank you, Patrick and team. That was excellent. So now that we've had our presentation, we're going to open this up to some Q&A. You do have a function in your toolbar where you can type in some questions, but we have some here to get us started, get the creative juices going, shall we? So, and I will let whichever team member answers first can go ahead and answer the question, or you can collaborate on your answer. So, outside of an excellent tenant communication plan, what other actions can companies and landlords do in order to provide comfort to tenants that have yet to return to the office?
Yeah, so communications and managing expectations are going to be really key, whether it's that weekly call or the detailed return to work plan, making sure you're showing empathy to your tenants and working with employees. But beyond that, I would suggest showing them what actions you're taking now. So if you're increasing your cleaning schedules, if your cleaning staff are wearing PPE, if you already have some of that signage in place, let them know that you're already thinking about this, and make sure that your communication really goes beyond just words and feelings to the concrete actions you're taking now, which will give them confidence when you tell them about the concrete actions you're going to take in the future.
Definitely. A lot of this seems to be around just sort of overall anxiety and the emotional side of things. So that's definitely helpful. This is a tricky one, and I'd like to know, we would like to know, how does the BIA recommend managing concerns around the connections to the TTC and increased COVID exposure opportunity? So what can companies and obviously facility managers, what can we do to help?
Sure, so I'll take that one. I think, really in addition to the physical environment recommendations we've outlined in the report, such as, enhanced cleaning of high touch points, encouraging one-way traffic flow, keeping doors open where possible, I think understanding tenant schedules and their return to work plans will be very important to help understand and keep reduce the spread of the peak period, or rather spread out the peak period. I think also encouraging mandatory mask use on transit will go a long way in ensuring that level of comfort. But also moving forward, I think looking to accommodate different new users of active transportation. We'll likely see more people walking and cycling who are currently reticent to take transit in today's day and age, and they'll certainly need facilities like bike parking, showers, change rooms, etc. And really an ability to provide those amenities from a landlord perspective will certainly go a long way.
Awesome. We do have a question from one of our members of IFMA. Ian Rogers has asked, in regards to elevators, has there been any thought on making masks mandatory, therefore allowing for increased capacity for each elevator run?
I'll go ahead and make an attempt to answer that one. In our discussions with the landlords that we've been speaking to, some of the properties have considered going so far as to state and post signage that the masks are mandatory. They are not actively enforcing that, as in preventing somebody from entering an elevator without a mask. They have noted, however, that they're going to still stick to the maximum of 4 people per elevator. I think as return to work appears to be likely to ramp up relatively slowly, this will probably become a common practice, and the cram rush for the elevators that you're used to seeing pre-COVID is likely to take some time before it comes back.
Thanks, Amy. Another question for you, or the team, I should say. What are you hearing, seeing as you're very connected to so many of the landlords in the financial district, and they have portfolios beyond the financial district as well, of course. What are you hearing as their #1 concern about staff returning back to the workplace?
So we're hearing a number of #1 concerns, if you will. They're related to expected items. I'm sure many of you have these concerns as well. There's a clear concern that we need specific public health metrics to understand how the lockdown eases to prevent a second wave of infection and lockdowns. Clear information from tenants on
Amy, you just cut out. Maybe we'll
return
move.
to work plans is definitely top of mind. Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. Internet connection unstable. Clear communications from the tenants. I know a lot of landlords are communicating more frequently than usual with their tenants to stay on top of return to work plans. Managing the movement of people in spaces, particularly the grade changes like the elevators, is top of mind. And really defining the roles and responsibilities between tenants and landlords. Who is conducting health screenings? How does that operate? Landlords are generally saying they don't want to do them for the buildings. We're even hearing tenants saying that they're placing the onus of responsibility on their employees as opposed to the tenant itself conducting the health screening. So there are a number of things. We're also hearing landlords are looking at technologies to provide improved building health, such as touchless technology. But generally, we're hearing that investment in new technologies are being taken with a view towards long-term value and are pretty conservative at this point.
Excellent, thank you. I have another question here from one of our attendees today. Curious about the elevator distancing protocols. The decals for the 4 people seem to be less than 2 meters of distance. Are there guidelines that were used for this solution? So must be referring to the image in the presentation. And that's from Daniela K.
So a lot of discussion was put into this. There was consideration given to, do we make a recommendation based on the capacity of an elevator? Is there a particular size that denotes how many people? Realistically speaking, for most elevators, if you were following strict physical distancing measures, you would have 1 person per elevator. And it's very clear you can't operate a large commercial tower with 1 person per elevator. So we were trying to balance the concern of actually being able to move people within the space with what people would clearly understand and recognize. By wearing a mask on top of that, That follows the public health guidelines of wear a mask when you are unable to physical distance, which is why landlords are generally strongly recommending the wearing of the mask.
Excellent, thank you. How do you recommend that tenants and landlords are ensuring a consistent message to building occupants in advance of the return to the office? How do you make sure it's consistent? You know, the landlord and the tenant themselves aren't potentially conveying different messaging or anything like that.
So I think having a baseline document in place, so having that return to work plan that really outlines responsibilities, especially who's going to take care of what, but also in terms of communications, throwing something in there that says key messages and says, you know, this is how we're communicating about these particular issues. For example, wearing a mask and keeping your distancing. And we encourage you to encourage tenants to use this as a baseline document in creating your own communications material. I think will go a long way to making sure that not only you're on the same page by checking in regularly and having a baseline document, but you're speaking the same language, using the same words. And then going in the other direction, checking in with public health officials. I mean, they've, you know, things occasionally do change, but in terms of their core messages, they've been simple and they've been very good. So if you can check in with them every once in a while, make sure that you are consistent with what they're saying, that's also going to help.
Thank you. Another question. I'm so happy to see everyone using this chat function. Alexis Her, hi Alexis. How are landlords managing the staggered start times? Are they providing a framework or waiting to hear from their tenants on their preferred adjusted work schedules?
Generally, they're using the guidance from the tenants. I know a lot of tenants are out there putting out surveys to their employees about their comfort level in returning, their willingness to work partially in the office and partially from home. So I have not heard of any landlord that's dictating these protocols. They're just requesting that their tenants be clear in communicating with the landlord, and also that they are very methodical in their return. We are strongly recommending, and I know a number of landlords are as well, that staggered work schedules with earlier and later start times happen, of course, to avoid the rush hours, but also considering a cohort approach where teams who work regularly together are in the office a few days, and then they're at home a few days, and then they're back in the office a few days. So clearly there's a lot of communication that's going to happen between the tenant and the landlord to be able to manage all of this. That being said, at this point we're hearing from tenants that it's going to be a very slow ramp up. We're expecting no more than 15 to 25% of employees to start coming back to work when they're allowed to in the initial phases. So I think there's time for these kinks to be worked out.
Certainly, and we're hearing a lot about the phasing and, you know, who those first people are going to be to go back to work, other than obviously the essential workers that are already there. Can you give any sort of feedback or thoughts on how companies and facility manager providers can sort of support in providing that guidance on identifying who should be part of those initial phases? And obviously you raised a great point around, you know, teams typically need to work together and collaborate. They should be identified together, but how do you recommend that companies are identifying their first wave or waves?
So there are a number, and every day they grow, of studies out there where companies such as KPMG and other companies have put out recommendations to help tenants, employers guide this process. I know it's happening on many levels, especially in larger employers. I think the most critical things is that employers are consistent, that they listen to their employees, that they maintain clear communication both with their employees and with the properties, that they ensure there's a policy of zero tolerance for sick work attendance, and that they're just regularly communicating. That's the strongest thing I can say. We're hearing tenants are surveying their employees, and I think that's going to drive this conversation more than anything.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I have a question here from IFMA. There have been some articles recently about stagnant water in pipes of office buildings that have been not running during the pandemic, or at full capacity at least. Have you heard anything about landlords raising this as a concern, or how maybe anyone's addressing this? I know that you wouldn't be necessarily very close to the water quality, but certainly talking about the ramp up of buildings again. Are you hearing any feedback on how landlords are managing this and facility management providers?
Patrick, do you want to take this one?
Sure. And if you know something I don't, let me know. So I don't think we've heard anything specifically from our buildings. I know in the Cushman-Wakefield study that Brody mentioned earlier, that really is included as one of their considerations that, buildings are going to have been quiet for a little while, and these are some steps you can take to make sure that your water systems are running properly. So I would defer to that guideline and say that, to my knowledge, we haven't heard strong concerns from our members yet.
Great, thank you. We're talking a lot about marking the floors and other kind of decals and how we can manage or proactively manage social distancing and continue to encourage it. Have you heard about any sort of feedback from landlords on, or tenants kind of flagging how you're going to manage congestion? Like, how are you going to sort of escalate that or enforce anything? Has there been any conversations or suggest communication and how to manage that? Because it's very sensitive, obviously, and you can only control what you do, but you can't control what others do. So just in terms of that management, like what do you recommend in providing a company or tool to support?
Sure, so I'll take that one. I'm thinking specifically to elevators and other common areas in terms of managing that level of congestion in those spaces. And what we are hearing is that landlords are evaluating certain types of technology to help them manage the movement of people over time. For example, one landlord here in the financial district is considering the use of an app to schedule either elevator reservations or parking spaces as well. Just one of the suite of tools that are being considered. I think also, though, conversely, we are hearing that I think any large capital investments are being reviewed based on really a long-term benefit. And I think understandably, there is caution and due diligence being undertaken before investing any huge capital into measures or technology, where I think the efficacy or the long-term need is still uncertain. I think in terms of managing that congestion initially with the gradual repopulation of buildings. For example, I think balancing the load on elevators will be easier in the early stages. Where that goes once buildings begin to further repopulate in the age of vaccines and whatnot, I think is still to be determined. So.
And I would just add that it is something where personal responsibility is going to play a role, and clear communication will be key to getting that buy-in. So some of the things that we heard were, in tight or congested corridors, you will have signage saying, keep to the right and no passing. Some landlords are considering posting extra staff in the early days to help guide people through the new process. And in a retail context, having those decals that we're all familiar with, and just supporting retail environments, but also letting them know that they'll be responsible for managing their own space. And I think that will help create a common understanding around the practices. I think we expect in the financial district a high degree of cooperation and with some capacity to offer guidance when it's necessary.
Great, thank you both. We have another online question here from Nick Highbine, IFMA board member. What have you been hearing about food services in the PATH system to date, and how may they adjust to service their clientele? Other regions have seen a major decrease in employees returning to work, and they're purchasing their food daily. Have you heard any concerns to this locally?
So one thing that we did mention in our guide was that where possible, buildings were looking at removing seating to provide greater queuing capacity and separating with stanchions just to make sure that when people arrive, they'll be able to have a clear place to stand and they'll be able to make that space. Another part of this conversation will be the scheduling of workers. So if you can not only phase in your return to work, but make sure that not everyone is going on lunch break at 12 o'clock, you'll be able to reduce the overall capacity that is required to service people at one given time, but still be able to extend sort of the lunch hour and serve everybody over a longer period of time.
Excellent, thank you. Everyone is looking to public health institutions to provide more information in order to support janitorial practices and products. What are you looking forward to getting clarity on the most? And obviously, we're seeing more and more research being done, and as that research comes out, more and more publications are coming out. But is there something in particular that you're really, really looking forward to getting some additional clarity on?
So on the cleaning piece specifically, the Government of Canada website does have a list of disinfectants that they have said there is evidence that these are effective against COVID-19. So that is, I guess, a starting point in that regard. When it comes to broader government regulations, I think that over the past week, when we've heard about public health officers in Southern Ontario talking to each other and suggesting some guidelines for the return that are really more specific than what we've seen already, I think that is definitely something to keep an eye on, because it will give us a sense of how we progress, and it may also give us a sense of, if we're dealing with a second wave, what to expect in terms of how things will be restricted again.
Thank you. I have a question here from Jyothi Paul, member of IFMA. Are you hearing from any landlords or end users about deferring any preventative maintenance programs, any scheduling for the building systems? Are you hearing anything like that? Obviously, priorities are to always be managing life and safety systems for the safety of the occupants, but are you hearing, and obviously it's kind of early still as well, but are you hearing anything about anyone deferring preventative maintenance at this point?
We have not heard anything about deferring preventative maintenance. We are strongly hearing that people are not looking to necessarily reinvent their HVAC system until there's more information about the virus and it becomes clear if that would be something that would be of long-term benefit to the properties. So in terms of preventative maintenance, we've not heard anything regarding that at all.
It's early days for sure. Another question here from Sean Bates, another board member of IFMA. Have you heard anything about landlords and how they're carrying out annual tenant fire drills and individual tenant muster points changing? Anything on that? Like, obviously, to carry out a fire drill, you got to have the people there. And part of those muster points, you have lots of people crowding. So have you heard anything? Obviously, it's still very early, but have you heard anything in regard to this matter?
That was actually a really big point of conversation when we started drafting this document. The financial district has a security group. It's members of security of a number of the large towers in the area, and they work very closely together on a daily basis. They actually collectively reached out to Toronto Fire to get more direction on how to do this. Did they need to do their spring fire drill given their buildings were less than 10% occupied? How would they go moving forward? So my sense is that is a situation that is still in flux, but we do encourage landlords to reach out to Toronto Fire and your contacts there to determine what you need to do in order to meet fire code and how best to do that.
Excellent, thank you, it's very helpful. I'm just watching the time. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think We'll do 2 more questions if you're all right with that, team. So another one from Ian Rogers. Ian, thanks for your participation today. Has the feedback that landlords have been receiving from tenants been generally positive in regards to having to potentially pay for additional cleaning? So there's the day-to-day pre-COVID janitorial services that were provided, but there's a lot of requests for above and beyond, and potentially you've had a potential case of an employee in your space, so you want to maybe ramp that up. The frequency and the product you might want to change as well to something stronger. Are you hearing anything in terms of kind of pushback or anything negative from the end users having to pay for that service, or is it more just all hands on deck and just trying to respond the best way we can and fastest?
So that was something that was mentioned by all of our landlords in the conversation. They were actively working to go through and determine what types of cleaning are provided under the lease agreement as it stands versus what type of cleaning would be an enhanced service that would be required for the tenant to pay for. I think in terms of actual cases that were confirmed in the building, most buildings already had implemented protocols to address that. But we don't actually have any feedback regarding whether there were complaints or whether it's been positive feedback. The one thing we do hear consistently is that cleaning is the top of mind thing for everybody, the tenants, the employees, the workers of the landlords, all of that. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to start revisiting those agreements, review what is currently acceptable according to the lease, what would be considered extra, and think about it from a perspective of if you have a property that normally provides tenant appreciation amenities such as special events or sidewalk sales and things like that, maybe use that as an opportunity to provide enhanced cleaning if required in lieu of that. So I think there are options, and I think everybody's just kind of working through this together at this point.
Indeed, thank you. Okay, here's our last question. Understanding that going back to the way we operated pre-COVID is a long way away, if ever will happen again. What good do you feel has come from this and our lessons learned from the pandemic and how we approach real estate operations?
So, I mean, I think you touched on it earlier. It really is early days in the recovery. We're still working our way through the pandemic. So to understand what the long-term change to operations will be, we're still learning that. You know, there is continued evolution of operations based on new science that seems to be coming out, evolving treatments, vaccine potential, and timelines. I think all of those are top of mind when people are thinking about long-term. I would say right now, clear benefits currently are strong collaboration between landlord, tenant, workers, opportunities to improve health in the buildings themselves, and then also accommodate those active transportation options as people take different modes to get to work, whether they're driving, whether they're not taking transit. We're certainly seeing an uptick in cycling, and certainly providing those facilities will be a benefit. I think regarding the future and what that holds, and what the new normal could mean. I think real estate is a very competitive industry, and I think savvy landlords will certainly use measures as marketing tools themselves to separate from their competitors in providing desired amenities that tenants are seeking. So I definitely see there's an opportunity for landlords to differentiate themselves and increase the desirability of their product as well.
Thank you. All right. We will wrap our Q&A, and I just have a couple closing remarks before we hit the top of the hour. Just want to thank again Amy, Brody, and Patrick. Thank you so much in the Toronto Financial District BIA for today's presentation and active discussion. We really appreciate your partnership. We need support like this from the FM community in order to continue to facilitate excellent programming. Thanks again. As promised, we will be posting today's recording on the website, so thank you all for joining, and thank you for your active participation in the chat. Lastly, IFMA Toronto and South Central Ontario would like to thank all of you that are working on the front lines as essential workers. We couldn't get through this without you. Take care, stay healthy, and keep in touch. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.